I never thought I'd live through something like this. When I tell this story, people often ask me if I'm exaggerating, but I swear, every word is true. My landlord, he wasn't just difficult. He was something else entirely. Calling him human feels generous. From the day I moved in, he began a pattern of harassment, theft, and intimidation that lasted 3 years. At first it was small things, little manipulations that I dismissed, but gradually it escalated into a nightmare. And yet, after all that, I discovered something remarkable. Justice sometimes comes when you least expect it. This is my story. I remember the day I signed the lease as if it were yesterday. The apartment looked fine on the surface, old but livable, quiet neighborhood, rent that was just within my budget. I was excited. Moving to a new place always carries a mix of hope and anxiety. At first, everything seemed normal. The first few weeks passed without incident. I unpacked, set up my furniture, made the space my own. I told myself I was lucky. Nothing was perfect, but it was home. But then, subtle things began to shift. I noticed items disappearing from the shared laundry area. Not major appliances at first, small things. Detergent, a laundry basket, a chair. At first I blamed myself, thinking I misplaced them. But the pattern became obvious. Then came the first confrontation. I had saved for months to buy a decent dryer. It wasn't fancy, but it worked. One morning I walked into the laundry room, and it was gone. My dryer, gone. No note, no explanation. I searched everywhere, nothing. When I asked the landlord about it, he looked at me with a casual smirk. "That's not yours," he said. "It belongs to the building." I stared at him, stunned. I had receipts, proof I had paid for it, but he waved me off. At that moment, I realized something. This man had no respect for boundaries, and worse, he didn't care about rules. Then came the plumbing disaster. The apartment didn't make things easier. The ceiling paint constantly flaked down, falling in small pieces like snow, leaving a constant reminder of neglect. The gas heater wasn't up to code, and the plumbing was a ticking time bomb. And the porch. For years I complained about it. It was unstable, unsafe, and yet every request for repairs was ignored. He replaced it eventually, but it wasn't permitted. I could barely believe it. For years, I had lived on a porch that could have collapsed under my weight. The harassment didn't stop there. He tried breaking into my apartment while I was home. He sent letters trying to charge me extra for parking. He retaliated whenever I involved a lawyer. One evening, I returned from work to find him at the doorway, standing there like he owned the place. My heart pounded. I had no idea what he might do. I called the police. He left before they arrived, but the intimidation left a mark. I felt powerless and angry. I started documenting everything, every interaction, every violation, every threat. Each day felt like a test of endurance. Living there was like being in a house of cards. One wrong move and everything could collapse. I constantly wondered, how far would he go? Would he escalate further? Could I survive this? Each night, as I lay in bed, I imagined the worst. And each morning, I woke up, still trapped. The next few months were a constant battle of nerves. Every interaction with him felt like walking a tightrope over a pit of sharp knives. I never knew what he might do, but I always knew it would be unpleasant. One evening, I returned from work to find a note taped to my door. The handwriting was scrawled, aggressive. Pay the extra $150 for the parking spot or face consequences. Do not ignore this. I froze. My stomach churned. I had paid for parking since the day I moved in. This was nothing but intimidation. I crumpled the note and shoved it in my pocket, deciding I would not give him the satisfaction of fear. Later that night, I went through my receipts and emails, documenting every payment I had made. I couldn't let him twist the truth. It wasn't paranoia. I knew him too well by now. He thrived on fear and confusion. A few days later, the harassment escalated. I heard a knocking at the door late at night. Not the usual polite knock, but sharp, insistent, and aggressive. My heart raced. Peeking through the peephole, I saw him standing there, his face red, his hands balled into fists. "You're late on the rent!" he shouted through the door. I took a deep breath and reminded myself, I wasn't late. Not really. The plumbing repair had caused a minor delay, but that was his fault. I refused to open the door and called the police immediately. Within minutes, officers arrived and he reluctantly backed off, muttering under his breath. Even then, I couldn't sleep. Every noise in the apartment made me jump. Every creak in the floor sounded like footsteps waiting to ambush me. For the first time, I truly understood what it meant to live in fear of someone who should have been accountable for your safety. Living there was like walking through a disaster waiting to happen. The ceiling constantly flaked paint, dust falling like snow onto the kitchen counter. I caught myself stepping around the flakes, imagining what would happen if a large piece fell on my head. The gas heater was another ticking time bomb. It had never been inspected properly, and I had no idea when I began to strategize. I couldn't continue like this. I couldn't let him win. But I also had to survive until I could leave. I started documenting everything meticulously. Photos of the ceiling, the porch, the heater, the plumbing. I recorded letters, messages, threats. Every shred of evidence mattered. At night, I lay awake, thinking about what he might do next. I imagined him sneaking into the apartment, breaking things, leaving threats. My imagination ran wild, but I knew that sometimes reality could be worse than fear. And then the idea came to me. Why not turn the tables? Why not make sure that when I finally left, he would face consequences for everything he had done? The thought gave me a spark of hope. The breaking point arrived in the form of a letter. A rent increase. $500 per month. Just like that. I stared at the letter for what felt like hours. After 3 years of harassment, theft, and threats, he had the audacity to demand more money? My blood boiled. I realized then that I had a chance. I could leave quietly, or I could ensure he paid for everything. The threats, the illegal work, the unsafe conditions. I chose the latter. I called the building inspector 4 days before I moved out. I spent over an hour explaining everything in detail. The illegal plumbing, the unsafe heater, the unpermitted porch, and the years of harassment. Every violation, every threat, every danger. The inspector came the very next day. I watched as he measured, photographed, and took notes. Each violation carried a $500 per day fine. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of power. He couldn't touch me anymore, not legally anyway. A week before moving out, He tried one last intimidation tactic. He insisted I vacate at a specific time, threatened the police, and even came to the apartment himself. I called the police early that morning, explaining the situation. I was determined not to be caught off guard. Later that day, I received a call. The morning the inspector arrived, I felt a mix of relief and nervous anticipation. He showed up right on time, clipboard in hand, measuring tape dangling from his belt like a soldier ready for battle. I led him through the apartment, pointing out every violation I had documented over the past 3 years. "We'll start with the porch," I said, trying to sound calm, though my heart raced. He squinted at the structure, tapping it with his hammer, measuring its support beams. "No permit," he murmured. "This is extremely unsafe." I felt a surge of vindication. Every year I had complained, every warning I had given had been ignored. But now, finally, someone recognized the danger. The inspector took photographs, scribbled notes, and occasionally muttered numbers under his breath. Each violation carried a $500 per day fine until fixed. Next was the plumbing. He crawled under the sink, flashlight in hand, inspecting every pipe. The illegal modifications were blatant. "This violates code," he said. "This is unsafe and needs immediate repair." I watched him move from room to room, documenting the flaking ceilings, the faulty gas heater, and all the unsafe wiring. Every step felt like a small victory. Finally, I was being heard. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of control. He could no longer intimidate me, not legally anyway. Even after the inspection, my landlord didn't stop. The week before my move-out date became a psychological battlefield. He sent texts, demanding I leave at a specific hour. He called multiple times, leaving threatening voicemails. Each time, I reminded myself that I had called the police in advance. I wasn't alone in this. The night before my move, I barely slept. Every creak of the floor, every shadow in the hallway made me tense. I imagined him trying to force his way in, imagining the confrontation escalating. My mind ran wild with what-ifs. What if he broke in? What if he destroyed my belongings? Then it happened. I arrived at the door. When the police finally arrived, I handed them my documentation, my photos, and my witness statements. They quickly assessed the situation and realized he had committed a felony, breaking and entering with intent to intimidate and harass. He fled before the supervisor arrived, likely aware that arrest was imminent. I stood there, heart pounding, barely believing what had just happened. Over the next few weeks, the consequences for him began to pile up. Each violation noted by the building inspector carried a daily $500 fine. Multiply that by the number of infractions, and the numbers quickly became staggering. The felony charge for breaking and entering added another layer of accountability. I watched, cautiously optimistic, as the town began to enforce the fines and pursue legal action. For the first time in years, he wasn't untouchable. Every illegal modification, every unsafe condition, every act of harassment was now documented, verified, and penalized. It was poetic justice, the kind that gives a lingering sense of satisfaction long after the confrontation ends. Looking back, those 3 years were harrowing. Living under his roof was terrifying, exhausting, and mentally draining. I experienced fear, anxiety, and frustration every single day. But through it all, I learned several critical lessons. Every photo, receipt, and note matters. Without proof, you have nothing. Calling the police or inspectors doesn't make you paranoid. It makes you proactive. Standing your ground, even when you feel powerless, can ultimately save you and hold wrongdoers accountable. It may take time, but when systems work, people like him face consequences. My story is over, but it's a cautionary tale. Many people live in apartments with landlords like mine. Predatory, manipulative, and abusive. If you find yourself in a similar situation, remember, you are not powerless. Stand up for yourself, document everything. Justice doesn't always happen immediately, but it does happen. And when it does, it's sweeter than you could ever imagine. The